Okay, we're still in the middle of cleaning garments, soaking garments, saturating garments. Okay, so the bottom line is you can't soak garments in liquid on Shabbos, unless if it's a very dirty liquid that's going to make the garment dirty. But even then, you have to be careful because you can't squeeze the liquid out of a garment. So therefore, when you let's say a garment became very wet, okay, you got stuck in a rainstorm, or you cleaned up on the floor, there was a spill, you took a rag or a paper towel, whatever it is, and you cleaned up the mess, and now the rag is very saturated with water. So then is when you move it around, you have to be very careful, because you can't just pick it up like this, because then you're going to be squeezing water out of it. So you have to pick it up in a way that you're careful not to come to squeeze it. It says there's a Mishnah in Shabbos that says if two people do it, so then it's okay, because they'll remind each other not to squeeze it. But like this, a person on his own. Now, what happens, if you want to put on wet clothing on Shabbos, and this has to do with wet laundry, and this, so let's get into this in a general way first. There's something called Mardasai. Mardasai means you're not allowed to do something that people will think you did something wrong, even though you didn't. So for instance, it's forbidden to hang wet clothing up on a clothesline on Shabbos. Years ago, they used to have clotheslines. Remember in Israel, they still have them. Yeah, today in America, nobody has them. But you're not allowed. You're not allowed to, even though the clothing were washed before Shabbos. So you didn't wash anything. All you're doing is hanging them up to dry. So you're not allowed to do that because people will think, you just washed the clothing and now you're hanging them up. So people will think that you washed the clothing on Shabbos. So it's Marasayin, which is halachically forbidden to do. But there's another thing. What happens if you wash garments and then they were still wet bein hashmoshes, between sundown and nightfall? So those garments remain muksa for the entire Shabbos. But I'm not done yet. Those garments are muksa for the entire Shabbos because the fact that they're wet when Shabbos began, bein hashmoshes, the din is something that became muksa when Shabbos began, bein hashmoshes, remains muksa the entire Shabbos, even though the reason doesn't apply anymore. Like for instance, you can't wear wet clothing, okay? So clothing are wet right when Shabbos, after sundown, so you're not allowed to wear them on Shabbos because you didn't think that you're gonna, and therefore even though technically they could dry, so halacha says very interesting, if it's bidei shamayim, if it's gonna dry because the outside air is gonna let it dry, you're gonna hang it up. So, or let's say you hung it up before Shabbos began. Right before Shkia, you washed the clothing. Right before Shkia, you hung them up on the clothesline. But when Shabbos began, they're still wet. So those garments are now forbidden to wear the entire Shabbos. If they're being dried by heavenly powers, like the sun. Why? Because we assume the person is not certain that he's going to be able to wear them. Because what happens if it starts raining? What happens if it's no sun anymore? So it might not dry. So anything that you're relying on bidei shamayim, as the halacha calls it, in the hands of heaven, so then you wouldn't be allowed to wear it on Shabbos because when Shabbos began it was muktzah.
Even if it's a summer and there's no way.
Correct. But what happens though if it could be nigmer bidei adam? For instance, you put it into a dryer. So let's say before Shabbos begins, you have a dryer in your house. So now to say the dryer is going to break is not something you have to think about. So if it's bidei shemayim, the halacha says it remains muktzah because maybe it won't dry. You're not fully aware that you might be able to wear it. But if you put stuff in the dryer right before Shabbos began, and then it's going to be in the dryer, and for sure it's going to dry, and you know that later on it's going to be dry and you're going to be able to wear them on Shabbos, so then the clothes are not muktzah. But the question is, are you allowed to put clothes in a dryer right before Shabbos? Now we're talking, if it was done already, then the clothes are not muktzah, you could wear them. But the question is, are you allowed to put clothing into a dryer before Shabbos and the dryer runs on Shabbos? What is the issue with that? So we spoke about this previous time. We learned this a while ago. There's something in halacha, it's called af shemilsa. Af shemilsa means it's not respectful for Shabbos. It's not proper. Okay? Now, there's a din in Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk about dryers. But Shulchan Aruch talks about a grinding mill. It says in halacha, and the Alter Rebbe brings it down, it's a Gemara, I mean, Shulchan Aruch, it's all over the place, that you're not allowed to have a mill, even though you started it before Shabbos, you're not allowed to have it work on Shabbos. Why? I can turn on a light, open a light, turn on a light, and it could work the whole Shabbos. If I turn on the mill before Shabbos, why can't it work on Shabbos? I'm not doing anything on Shabbos. Because the fact is, it makes a lot of noise, and to have something making noise on Shabbos in your house is not in the spirit of Shabbos. It's called af shemilsa. It's just not Shabbos-dik, like they say. So therefore, any machinery that makes noise, so you're not allowed to have working on Shabbos, even though you turned it on before Shabbos. One second. So what happens if you, let's say, put on the dryer before Shabbos? As everybody knows, dryers make noise. It's not as bad as a mill, but still, even though it's in a room somewhere off to the side, but the fact is, you're having in your house a machine that's working on Shabbos, making a lot of noise, you can't do it. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that let's say, it doesn't apply to a shul, but in a house, let's say, the housekeeper wants to clean up, okay? So technically, they can bend down on all fours and get all the dirt out. So they want to use a vacuum cleaner, let's say, for their own personal, to make it easier. Instead of getting down, like we learned, a Jew can't wash dishes in Shabbos with hot water, but if a guy wants to use hot water or a sponge, they're allowed to, because there's a kosher way of doing it, cold water without a sponge, and they want to do it for their convenience, so they're not doing it for you, they're doing it for themselves. So what happens if this is brought down in halacha, by the way, what happens if you have a housekeeper in your house, they want to use the vacuum cleaner? So halacha says you can't. Why? Because the vacuum cleaner makes noise. So you can't have a noisy thing working on Shabbos. Same thing would apply to a dishwasher. The same thing would apply to any of these types of things, whatever it may be. So now the question is, you have a noisy air conditioner. So why is that allowed? Because that's for the comfort of Shabbos. It's not the same thing as a dryer working or a vacuum cleaner working. It's cooling off the thing to make Shabbos more comfortable. So therefore it is in the spirit of Shabbos, that would be allowed.
Hang dry indoors.
What?
Be hang dry something.
Oh, well, so 1 second. So now, therefore the din is like this. We learned you're not allowed to hang up clothes on Shabbos because Marasayim. But that only applies when you hang it in a place where people normally hang clothes to dry. On a clothesline, right? But what happens if you hang up a wet coat on a hanger in the bathroom? The bathroom is not a place where people normally hang clothes. So then it wouldn't be Marasayim. Or if you hang it up on the back of a chair, something like that. But you couldn't hang it in a place like on a clothesline where people normally would hang clothing. Now there are opinions in halacha, not everybody agrees with it. They say that if, let's say, it's something that you normally don't wash, like a suit. Today you don't wash, you dry clean it. Or a coat. Yeah, the people, today you don't wash your coat, you dry clean it. So some poskim want to say that because normally it's dry cleaned, so then when you hang it up, people are not going to know that you didn't wash it. Because it's not something you wash. So therefore, if it's not something you wash and you're hanging it up, so people, the whole Marasayim, people might think you washed it on Shabbos, but if it's something you don't wash on Shabbos, you don't wash, so then many poskim say you would be allowed to do it. Well,
what if the laundry is like in an attached garage outside the house, or if it's like in the basement?
It's still in your domain. You can't start differentiating. It's in your domain. It's not something that should be done. But
It's a contradiction. I'm not getting it correct. If you put something on a timer, like you said, which is a lot more involved in, that would be okay. Even that also makes noise and that's.
It doesn't make noise. When do a sprinkler make noise? It's not making noise.
Yes, it does. Makes water noise.
Okay, can you have sprinklers on a timer? According to the Moshe Feinstein, he writes clear in the Chuvas. I mean, he passed away a long time ago. I don't know if he would say differently today. But what he wrote in the Chuvas is, the only thing you're allowed to have timers for on Shabbos is air conditioning and lights. That's it. According to the Moshe Feinstein, you cannot have timers for anything else. Most poskim disagree. No, and he says why? Because these things people know you put on timers. But other things people are not going to know, so they're going to think you turn on the sprinkler on Shabbos. Okay. Now, 1 second. If you live in, but most poskim disagree, by the way, and they say if it's something that people, like in California, yeah, when you walk by and somebody the sprinklers go off. I mean, in California, everybody knows it's on a timer. You know, nobody went to turn on the sprinkler. It goes on by itself. Okay, so that's not an issue. That would be allowed. To put a timer on cooking, that's for sure forbidden on Shabbos. You can't have a time, let's say, I'll give you an example. We discussed this a while ago. What happened, you know, people have coffee makers, yeah? So they go to sleep at night, you set the coffee maker to go on 6 o'clock in the morning, that you wake up at whatever time, you have a fresh cup of coffee all ready to go. That, according to all opinions, you're not allowed to do on Shabbos. Why? I don't know, but this is what everybody writes. You can't cook on a timer on Shabbos. There's reasons for it, but whatever. But you can have a timer to close an oven. Let's say you have I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a Shabbos mode oven, okay? And let's say you have an oven that you can have a timer close the oven and start the oven, right? Turn on. Okay, turn on and turn off the oven. Yes, thank you very much. Turn on and turn off the oven. So to turn on the oven, let's say you want to put something in the oven, so you'll turn it on Shabbos morning, you put the food in before it's turned on, and then you'll turn on the oven by the time clock. That everybody says you can't do. But what happens, let's say Friday night, you want to keep food in the oven, but you don't want to open the oven door because it's a big question opening oven door. If the oven's on, Shabbos is a very massive question. So the question is, but can I have the oven, let's say I need the food at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock, so I'm going to put the oven on the timer to close the oven at 8:45, 10 to 9. Okay, then when they open the door at 9 o'clock, there's no problem, there's no more fire because the oven closed. The oven was turned off. So that you would be allowed to. But to have a timer putting it on, that you're not allowed to, not for cooking. But generally speaking, for all other things, generally speaking, besides cooking and baking and things like that, you can use timers. What?
With clothing, if it's wet and the person usually during the week wears wet clothing,
then it's fine. Then he would be allowed to wear it. But again, if it's very wet, you can't put it on if you're going to squeeze.
Even if he's not knocked it?
Right. No, it doesn't matter if squeezing. It doesn't matter if you mocked it. If you're already wearing it already, then you can continue wearing it. And they're right, even socks that mamash when you step, if your socks are sopping wet. I was telling you the guys the other day, they were complaining about the rain, the Shabbos morning. We were bachnim, we once had a halacha to go from Crown Heights to Queens. It was like a 2.5 hour walk, at least. 2.5 hours.
3 hours.
Okay, thank you. And it was pouring, not California pouring, New York pouring. You know, New York pouring. Anyway, it was like 40, 50 bachrim. We went to walk to Queens in the rain. We were so wet, it didn't matter if we walked through a puddle, around a puddle, it didn't matter at all. We were stopping, we come into the shows, we got the carpets wet, they were screaming at us. It was very freilich. But, so the question, if you're wearing socks and you're walking on the socks, so they're right, that's not an issue because you're not squeezing the normal way of squeezing. Normally you squeeze with your hand.
Right.
But you have to be careful when you take off those sopping wet socks or pants or shirt or whatever it is. You have to take it off in a way that you can't just pull it off, because then you're going to be squeezing. So you have to take it off in a way that you're just holding the end of it, and nothing else happens. Okay.